Hello and welcome to Next Week in Westminster.
This is the podcast that looks ahead to next week's bills and debates in the House of Lords and the House of Commons.
And we explore what next week's business in Parliament means for you and the country from both sides of the House. I'm Marcus Jones, a former Conservative MP and Minister.
And I'm Sam Tarry, a former MP and Labour Shadow Minister. On this podcast, we don't just dwell on what people have already said in politics. We discuss what will be going on to give you the insider's view on the workings and processes inside Westminster.
And don't forget to follow us and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you the inside information from the Palace of Westminster.
So this week, we'll be looking at ways to force offenders to attend court, making the skies greener and upping pensions and benefits for the coming year.
The Victims and Courts Bill will be in the Lords, giving greater powers to the Crown Court to ensure offenders appear at their sentencing hearings.
Lords will continue to examine the government's efforts to decarbonise the industry. That means using renewable alternatives to aviation fuel with the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Bill.
And making sure everyone gets the right amount of pensions and benefits. There's some important business to attend to in both houses.
And now a note from our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by College Green Group, the strategic political advisory company. Don't just learn about next week, change it.
So let's get straight on to our first bill.
Victims and Courts Bill, the House of Lords, committee stage day 1, Monday the 9th.
As its name suggests, the Victims and Courts Bill gives greater support and protection to victims in the Crown Courts in England and Wales.
So Marcus, I've got sadly some personal experience of this. Poor woman Zara Lena was actually a constituent of mine murdered in Ilford on the drive, not far from my old primary school, in fact. And this was a case that I supported the family with right through to the Old Bailey. But it kind of gets really to the heart of this. In fact, I actually had a campaign with the family, with the aunt of Zara, to really push at that time the Conservative government, Dominic Raab, who, to be fair to him, was very generous of his time, gave us an hour actually to have to sit in his office and discuss, which, although I was an MP, that's still pretty unusual to get an hour of ministerial time. And this was specifically to talk about the growing number of serious offenders who refuse to actually attend their sentencing hearings. That moment, I suppose, for the victims' families, or the victims still there. In this case, obviously, of course, she was murdered by a chap called Jordan McSweeney, who really shouldn't. There was a whole litany of issues, probation failings, etc. But I think the thing that was most insulting as a family is that when he was found guilty, and it was a pretty tough sentence, as it should have been, he just refused to be in court and refused throughout the court proceedings to be there. And that moment of justice being seen to be delivered was denied the family.
Yeah, and I think we've all sat in front of people at surgeries who pour out terrible stories of things that have happened to very close family members.
So, Marcus, then what's this bill actually going to do to prevent this sort of thing happening?
The bill gives the Crown Court powers to require offenders to attend their sentencing hearings and to make sure that they behave properly in court. A Crown Court will be able to punish offenders who refuse to attend court or indeed behave disruptively during proceedings.
Yes, and my understanding is that failure to comply with such a court order will be seen as criminal contempt of court, and the bill allows for reasonable force to be used where necessary. It's clearly about upholding the dignity of the victim as well as the authority of the court. And as I said, justice being seen to be done in the eyes of the families.
Yeah, and I've had several families that I've supported over the years that have been in this position. They've gone to court, they've looked eye to eye with the perpetrator of the crime, and it's been a difficult experience. So I just really hope that within this process they're able to think about that and think how the victims' families can be supported in the best way.
No, absolutely, Marcus. I think one sort of small minor note, but an important one. I remember speaking to the Prison Officers Association, and they just said the issue isn't that they would say, for example, support this happening. In fact, they would. It's just that actually this bit about where it says reasonable force to be used where necessary, but essentially means pretty much dragging these people out of the cells to actually, face the judge and face the court or the jury. And of course, that means there's a danger to those prison officers. So it's not I think both Conservative and Labour have kind of wanted to do a similar thing, but actually how this is delivered is going to be quite tricky.
Yeah, and I think in the debate in the Commons around this, that's certainly the support given to prison officers and the protective equipment, etc., is something that's certainly been debated.
Definitely. So that's not all this bill does, though, Marcus. What else does this bill do?
The bill also provides, Sam, a legal safeguard that non-disclosure agreements cannot be used to silence victims or cover up crimes. The bill makes clear that NDAs of this nature will be considered void.
Yes, and this is something that a number of Labour MPs have been kind of campaigning on, most notably former Transport Minister Louise Hay. In fact, my old boss when I was a Shadow Minister, she's been very outspoken on this alongside a number of female MPs. And I think from across the House, the idea essentially that non-disclosures are being used to shut down, often with it being a big corporate institutional situation, misdemeanours, often of a sexual nature. You know, people are basically paid to shut up and go away.
Yeah, and that can't be right. The bill also, Sam, has other ways to support victims of abuse. It looks to close the gap between criminal and family law so that children of sex offenders will have more immediate protection.
Yeah, it's really shocking, this, to be honest, Marcus. I think, just both looking through this now, that really until this bill was passed, child sex offenders are able to keep parental rights over their own children, even after conviction. So that basically means at the moment, parental rights are absolute in law and can only be changed through a court order. So, for example, if a father is convicted of sexual offences against any child and is in prison, he can still seek contact with his own child or still have a say in their life. And I think a lot of our listeners will probably agree with us in thinking that's pretty wrong and surprising.
Yeah, there seems to be a gap, and this is a government-backed amendment that means that convicted sex offenders given a sentence of 4 years or more will automatically have their parental rights over their children removed, and this can only later be changed by the High Court or a family court order.
This bill further protects victims of rape resulting in the birth of a child. At the moment, there are no automatic parental restrictions for such convicted rapists who are able to apply for parental responsibility. This means, astonishing, that survivors live in fear that they may have to discuss their own child's upbringing with the man who actually raped them. And with this bill, in such cases, that parental right would then be restricted.
And finally, the bill modernises the legislative framework in England and Wales to provide victims with clear avenues to receive information about an offender's release while the offender is serving their sentence.
This feels really kind of overdue, to be honest, Marcus, an overdue update to the law that would be giving many more protections rightly to victims and reducing the rights of perpetrators, criminals. So where are we in terms of the process of this bill, Marcus?
It's day one of the committee stage in the Lords, which means the start of line-by-line scrutiny of the bill. Sam, it's not strictly about this bill, but it's an associated issue of the courts, and David Lammy is trying to put forward this idea of swift courts and abolishing jury trials. What do you think about that? It seems an odd idea to me.
Clearly, the Justice Secretary, I think, in my view, has got it wrong on this. I don't think abolishing or getting rid of nearly 1,000 years of British history, first confirmed in the Magna Carta that you have a right to trial by jury, is a way to go about, basically getting rid of the court backlog. The real solution clearly here is that older issue, funding. Why, for example, are the courts not at full capacity? I speak to KCs, I speak to solicitors, barristers, and the reality is so many courts are not having all of the courtrooms in use at any given time. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that, but clearly just abolishing jury trials is not the right way to go.
And Carl Turner, he's apoplectic about this, isn't he?
Yeah, I do. I've spoken to him quite a bit over the last few weeks, and I imagine his collar is being sort of felt rather stiffly by the Whip's office at the moment.
Yeah, I worked with Carl for 14 years and we didn't really agree on anything, but I certainly agree with him on this.
No, this has got him really fired up. It's a matter of principle, and I think he's even gone as far as saying he'd potentially cause headache for the Prime Minister, resign his seat. But he'll go down as a hero in history for standing up for 1,000 years of British rights.
Yeah, I'm sure the Prime Minister doesn't want another by-election on his hands.
So now we come to our political gotcha moment segment. Now, of course, gotchas are that moment when many politicians do get caught off guard. And to make sure Marcus and I don't get complacent, our producer wants to test us on our knowledge of the cost of shopping.
Yeah, usually journalists ask politicians the price of a pint of milk, but every week we have to guess other things. So I have the envelope this week, Sam. Let's have a
Rip
little...
it open.
Yeah. Let's have a little look. Oh, this is a good one. There's two little questions here. How much does a pack of butter weigh?
How much does a pack of butter weigh? A pat of butter? 250 grams.
I completely agree with you, Sam. Although when I ask the next part of the question, I think it could be 200 grams. Bit of shrinkflation, perhaps. So, how much does a pack of anchor butter cost?
Well, once upon a time I used to stack those at Ilford Sainsbury's and it was 250 grams.
But what's the cost?
Anchor butter, that's a bit dearer, so I would say that would probably be coming in at about £2.39.
And I'll go for £2.09.
So we'll get to the end of the show and we'll reveal whether Marcus and I don't know our butter from our biscuits. Sorry, it's made that up there.
This podcast is sponsored by College Green Group, the strategic political advisory company at the heart of Westminster. So, Sam, before we get on to the next bill, let's just say a bit about what's happening in Westminster this week, and what a hell of a week it's been.
Oh, definitely.
The Mandelson scandal engulfing everything. He's now said he'll step down from the House of Lords, but he still holds the title of Lord Mandelson. We've got to see an act of Parliament to get rid of that title off Mandelson. What do you think this has done to the government, Keir Starmer, and where it leaves us, Sam?
It's a raging firestorm, isn't it? And, who knows where the kind of backlash, the sort of afterburn, who else is going to get engulfed in the flames? The Prime Minister is clearly on fire. Other people, potentially people in the cabinet who have had very long-standing relationships with Mandelson, I think will be very, very nervous at the moment, wondering if those flames are going to start to burn at their feet too. It's a really difficult week for the Prime Minister. I think in some ways perhaps made worse by what he had to say in response to the leader of the opposition, Kemi, in PMQs, basically admitting stuff, which I think almost the whole House kind of, it was quite a dark moment when he thought, wow, okay, that's not good. And I think, there would have been people on the Labour side and, of course, on the Conservative side thinking that as well. Really, really tough, because I just think the problem for Keir, no one believes him. He was warned by so many people. And this really could be one of the final nails in his political coffin.
And one of those people driving the nails in has been Kemi this week, who's been on fire for the right reasons with this humble address that was laid. A very clever mechanism that can be used on an opposition day to get a government to reveal government papers. Clearly, that was a very well-drafted motion, because now we've seen that Number 10 is having to divulge all manner of messages and information that they just wouldn't want to have divulged. And we've also had then Angela Rayner, who seems to have come out of this looking pretty good, as she corralled the Labour backbenches sufficiently to encourage Number 10 and the whips to get the Labour Party into position where they would put down an amendment that the opposition would accept.
Yes, Angela having to sort of step in almost to bail out the government's crisis yet again. And of course, it just shows that, people won't necessarily always understand how those far kind of Byzantine parliamentary mechanisms are actually so powerful. And of course, this one, having to link up with the ISC, a very powerful security committee. I think, is it Kevan Jones who oversees that now in the Lords, that this actually was a serious constitutional issue, actually, as well as being a moment of very high political drama.
So good week then for Kemi, Angela, bad week for Keir.
Right, I think time to move on to our second bill.
The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Bill, House of Lords, report stage, Tuesday, 10th February.
This is an important piece of legislation, Marcus. This helps airlines and aviation fuel companies meet environmental targets for reducing carbon emissions from flying.
Peers examine the line-by-line text at committee stage, and now at report stage they'll have another chance to debate amendments, tweak wording and push back on some of the government's proposals. And then the bill will move on to third reading, and it will head then back to the Commons for them to consider the amendments made by the Lords.
Yeah, it's a really detailed stage there. Marcus, did you know that one return flight from London to San Francisco emits around 5.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per person? In real terms, that's twice the emissions from a family car in an entire year. So there's a lot that aviation is going to have to do to get anywhere near the targets government wants, most importantly improving the fuel that planes use, and this is where sustainable aviation fuel will come in, of course.
Yeah, according to the government, the bill will help reduce carbon emissions in aviation fuel by supporting the production of what's called Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF. This is a lower carbon alternative to the traditional jet fuel made from things like cooking oils, waste and other renewable sources.
So we could get a flight powered by my local Chippy's chip fat. Well, that is pretty interesting, Marcus. The idea then clearly is to cut greenhouse gas emissions by up to 6.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent by 2040. That would mean mixing the sustainable aviation fuel, the SAF, into the traditional fuel to help, I suppose, thin it out and make it go further.
I think it'd be okay, Sam, as long as the chip shop fuel was properly filtered first and it didn't smell of cod. But yeah, so the government, I thought, had actually done this already, Sam.
Not exactly. What they did do was put a mandate on sustainable aviation fuel, obliging fuel suppliers to increase the amounts of SAF into the fuel mix that's sold in the UK. Currently, it's about 2%, and the idea is it then goes gradually up to 22% by 2040, which is obviously not that long away now. The problem is then that this means we need to increase production tenfold over the next 14 years. And for that, there needs to be a heck of a lot of money spent on building the refineries to cope with scaling up.
And that's what this bill does. It makes scaling up easier.
Precisely, by implementing what's known as a revenue certainty mechanism.
And for those in the room who might not know, Sam, tell us about this idea of the revenue certainty mechanism.
So the revenue certainty mechanism, in principle, fixes a price for suppliers so that they can predict what incomes they'll receive. That means that if the actual market price is higher, the government essentially subsidises the companies so they can keep growing. If the price goes then down, the suppliers keep paying the same price and are essentially paying back the government the money that's gone in. So the details of that mechanism are likely to follow in what's called secondary legislation.
Yeah, so the devil is in the detail, but this revenue certainty mechanism should therefore, Sam, give producers confidence to build new facilities that are badly needed here in the UK. So this bill is not just about environmental goals, but it's also about supporting business, communities and encouraging investment and jobs.
Yeah, totally. This is actually part of the government's wider industrial strategy, dare I say. The peers in committee stage, I think we should note, repeatedly highlighted that without some kind of price guarantee, manufacturers will actually struggle to just justify the huge upfront costs of building SAF plants. Remember, aviation is one of the harder sectors to decarbonise overall. That's why SAF is vital.
Yeah, some figures for you, Sam. This sustainable aviation fuel, the chip shop fuel as you call it, Sam, can cut CO2 emissions by around 70% compared with conventional fuel. And importantly, SAF is relatively easy in small amounts to use with existing aircraft without having to adapt the engines. That's got to be good news.
Yeah, that's actually quite a big deal because even as other parts of the economy might decarbonise, aviation emissions are actually projected to stay stubbornly high. In fact, recent data suggests the UK's existing SAF uptake is still well below target, about 20% short, actually, of the first year of the mandate. So, Marcus, what's going to actually precisely happen in the Lords next week?
Well, peers will be debating report stage, and this is about debating whether the government's targets are ambitious enough or not. Some peers want stronger reporting requirements, so airlines have to show the public how much SAF they're actually using. Other peers want clearer signals about how this fits into longer-term decarbonisation beyond just blending fuels. There is also the question of foreign ownership of technology, and if that's to be the case, will we truly have fuel security?
So some pretty meaty questions to grapple there, Marcus, and lots of technical stuff as well. The bottom line is this bill could actually shape the future of UK aviation's carbon footprint, as well as the billions upon billions of pounds of investment, where that ends up being deployed. So it's clearly not just a niche environmental bill, along with net zero goals. It's actually, as I said, about industrial strategy. It's new jobs, industrial policy, and meeting net zero goals. And if you remember, there was a point at which that whole green industrial growth strategy was a much bigger part of Labour's agenda.
Oh, absolutely. And this is not just about the environment, though. This is also about people who want to go on holiday abroad, and we've got to consider them. And will it cause a problem and an additional cost to a plane ticket? Does that mean that the family holiday might become too expensive, or, people might not be able to go at all?
So, according to what the government's saying, it's not going to be too much. The revenue certainty mechanism to keep sustainable fuel prices stable should help on that front. There'll be a levy on aviation fuel to fund that mechanism. So, during the second reading, we should note the Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander, told Parliament she expects minimal changes to fares, with a change in average ticket prices around £1.50 a year.
Yeah, well, Sam, I've heard all that before. And importantly, the Shadow Minister, Lord Moylan, has called for an amendment demanding an annual report from the government which should assess the impact of this bill on the price of tickets, ensuring that the figure of £1.50 is kept to. Although I'm not sure that would possibly work over time with inflation, but it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
So, Marcus, it's now time to take the pulse of the country through the ruse of a light libation. Each week we hear from different parts of the country to actually get a sense of what people are saying. And of course, in pubs, landlords will often overhear those sorts of conversations.
Yeah, it's my favourite segment, love a good pub. So this week, just as we've been discussing greenhouse gases, we're going across to Herefordshire and a pub that prides itself on its eco-credentials, as well as finding out what the price of a pint is there.
Hi, I'm Andy Link. I'm chef patron at the Riverside Inn at Ainstree. We're a country inn, restaurant and pub. We're a very sustainable business that really tries to champion local produce. At the moment, we've got great local ale, Herefordshire Pale Ale, and that's £5.20. And then we have some great kind of local Herefordshire wines as well. And we've got a glass of their Bacchus, which is £10.80. People are always aware that the air travel now is seen as bad for the environment. So people are conscious about taking foreign holidays or travelling further, let's say, by plane. We've noticed that there's a massive movement towards staycationing and just holidaying locally. So a lot of our hotel guests are actually from Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Shropshire. They often tell us at the bar that they're not going on a large international holiday now. This year, they're just going to try and stay local. That's because they've got less money in their pocket. A lot of people now are finding that they've got less disposable income, so they're making sustainable decisions, but also financial decisions at the same time. And I think the air travel is core to that. I think people are concerned. Air travel prices have gone up and down in the last few years, so people are wary of it. And I would say that they would be concerned with anything that would increase the cost of air travel further. People don't want to be out of pocket for the sake of the environment. But I do think there's a misunderstanding with where the money's going and a lack of clear communication of understanding. Are we funding a project unnecessarily? Often the locals we get in that are discussing this over their beer, they're always very wary of large-scale government projects that are green or that are termed sustainable, because often there's not an understanding of why this is or what the benefit will be in the future. And I think that's a difficult thing to sell. That's often the concern with our guests. We always make sure we clearly say that this is what we're doing. This is how we're sustainable, and this is the benefit that we're getting and the environment is getting locally and the community. I think everybody wants to be part of a community still, and I think that massively helps if they understand that that benefit goes on to the next generation.
Well, interesting there, Marcus. We've heard from an eco-establishment. You get a nice glass of English Bacchus wine. I'm wondering whether Ellie Chowns, the first ever Green MP for North Herefordshire, pops in there to have some sustainable food. But just interesting, somewhere that's got a sustainable pub, people making conscious choices about travel based on, thinking about the environment, and part of the green surge that we saw at the last election.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's a part of the country that's been blue forever. And, it's a beautiful part of the world, River Wye, and you can see why people want to protect their environment.
So, Marcus, before we explore the next section of parliamentary business and legislative excitement, we're going to take a quick look at the state of our nation. That's a few numbers each week that help explain what's going on in the country. and we're going to call this the stats of our nation. Over to you, Stato.
That's very good. Thank you, Sam. I've got a couple of figures for you this week. Firstly, the latest YouGov tracker shows 75% of people think that the government is handling the UK economy badly. And an ONS survey from January showing that only 20% of businesses expect business performance to improve in the next 12 months. That's pretty dire.
Yeah, bleak reading. I mean, I remember this was like this under the Tories, and it's now sort of continuing under Rachel Reeves. Ultimately, and any politician will tell you this, general elections, when they come, are nearly always won or lost on the economy, ultimately.
Yeah, as Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid.
No, absolutely.
On another difficult subject, we do have better news, though, for the government, Sam. The number of teenagers killed by knives in England and Wales has fallen by about 60%. This fall in knife-related deaths has driven the number of all teenage homicide victims to almost half, from 66 to 34, reaching its lowest level since March 2013. Now, clearly, one of these incidents is one too many for the individual and the families involved. But let's hope that trend continues.
Yeah, look, I mean, one thing you never got trained on when you become an MP is when the family, and it'd often be a mum, would come into your constituency surgery and talk to you about, usually was a son, but not always, that had lost their life in often, ludicrously avoidable knife crime. So that is very welcome news indeed.
Yeah, we've both been there with those parents, and it's heartbreaking. So, Sam, now we're going to look at some very important pieces of business in the Commons that affect people's everyday lives.
We're going to be talking about state pensions and various social security benefits. These are pieces of what's known as secondary legislation. Marcus, do you want to give us a run through? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, the idea of secondary legislation allows Parliament to fill in the practical and operational details following on from the original Act of Parliament. So, in this instance, it is to uprate the various state benefits by inflation.
So on Tuesday in the Commons, MPs will debate the benefit and pension uprating orders. Then both houses will approve annual orders to increase state pensions and social security benefits for the new financial year.
Yeah, these technical motions deliver the April uplift in payments, which are vital for millions of people. This year, upratings will ensure pensions and benefits keep pace with inflation, honouring the triple lock and other commitments, directly affecting the income for retirees, low-income families and others on support.
Another piece of secondary legislation being debated this week in the Commons on Wednesday are motions relating to police grant and local government finance reports.
Yeah, this is important, Sam, because without these reports being agreed, local government and police and crime commissioners won't be able to set their budget for the coming year.
Marcus, I remember you were the local government minister, 10 years ago? So I suppose you probably had first-hand experience of this.
Yeah, and it's not always plain sailing to get the vote through, and I can attest to that because back in 2016, with a slim majority, we had to head off a rebellion of newly elected backbenchers from the southwest, and we had to work very closely with the Treasury, who ultimately had to put more money into the settlement for local authorities. We managed to get that through, but it wasn't straightforward. Now a look to other business in Westminster next week and why you and your family should care about it.
On Monday, the Commons have got a general debate on the UK-India trade agreement.
After Brexit, such bilateral agreements are needed to get the best possible deals for the UK. This free trade agreement with India with the aim of boosting bilateral trade by more than £25 billion.
It still needs to be ratified, so the debate lets Parliament scrutinise the deal's potential benefits and pitfalls.
Also on Monday, in the Commons, a backbench debate on a motion to increase survival rates for brain tumour patients.
Brain tumours have amongst the lowest survival rates of any cancer, and MPs want to press the government for more research funding and better treatment strategies. It's essentially a push to save lives and support affected families.
Yeah, it's a really worthwhile debate. And just looking what else is going on, it looks to me, Sam, as though the Backbench Business Committee have been given 2 full days on the floor of the House of Commons next week by the government, which is quite rare, really. Do you think that's a sign of a government that's run out of ideas, Sam?
Not so much run out of ideas. I think, it's more a case that they're just crisis management or stumbling from crisis to crisis. Different bills having to be pulled, resubmitted. We've seen that even trying to put this podcast together over the past few weeks, right, Marcus?
Yeah.
Things in, things out, a bit of hokey-cokey.
Yeah.
And, of course, that is often because of the pressure from backbenches and unforeseen consequences to things that have been brought forward and the timing of those.
And in the next few weeks, months, we're probably looking at another King's Speech as well.
Well, that would be interesting indeed. And if we go from the Commons Chamber to Westminster Hall on Monday, MPs will debate Russian influence on UK politics and democracy. And this is one of those ones, Marcus, where it's been prompted by a public e-petition that actually hit that threshold of 100,000 signatures.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'm sure the discussion is likely to force the government to respond on a whole host of issues like election interference, Kremlin-linked donations to political parties, and national security safeguards.
The government has already announced an independent review of Russian influence in the UK, and actually in reply to its petition when it reached 10,000 signatures, the government said they will not tolerate attempts to interfere in our politics from any foreign actor, and we will take all measures necessary to defend our democracy. And of course, with the global situation as it is, you do wonder what the Kremlin will be making of the sort of Western NATO allies squabbling amongst themselves. And of course, at the same time, some politicians here clearly come under heat. Some of the reform politicians having taken direct donations from clearly Russian-linked organisations.
Yeah, no doubt the Kremlin and the people there will be rubbing their hands together in glee.
But it is important. I mean, it's in Westminster Hall, but it's a really important topic. Those 100,000 people are clearly sensible, making us debate that here in Westminster.
Yeah, we shouldn't discount how important Westminster Hall is for getting issues onto the agenda that are quite often later on spoken about in the main chamber of the Commons. On Wednesday, the Rare Cancers Bill is in the committee stage in the Lords.
It's about increasing research and investment into rare cancers, and that's defined as those affecting fewer than 1 in 2,000 people.
And this is really important, and it will force the government to support rare cancer research and make it easier for patients to find out about new research that's going on. And on Thursday in the Lords, there's a short debate on reforming the law on donations to political parties.
This debate was called by Lord Prem Sicker, I actually know him quite well, who said in the Lords in November that people are disillusioned with the political system.
Yes, it's interesting that Lord Sicker was a professor of accounting because he wants to highlight concerns over donations to political parties. In the chamber in November, he said that political parties are busy selling themselves to the highest bidder.
Yeah, Lord Sicker really kind of sticking it on all parties, a plague on all their houses is almost what he's saying. And it's a really serious issue. We need to be really clear whether it's foreign influence or indeed corporate influence that our politicians are not bought. I, for one, would like to see quite substantial party political funding reform.
And the other influence is union influence, Sam, which I know probably you think of in a better way than I do. But
cleanest money in politics, Marcus.
Well, yeah, we could have a debate over that. But what I would say is, the ultimate position that we're going to potentially is whether or not the taxpayer funds political parties, and what would the public think of that? But that's for another day.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would be unpopular. However, it's worth pointing out that is how the majority of parties in Europe are actually funded, and it is a good way of keeping, benign influences of whatever background out of politics and saying this is an even playing field and you can't just buy your way to election victory or indeed buy your way to policy victory. So, Marcus, this week's list of candidates to receive the ermine and join the House of Lords begins with Baroness Macleod, Catherine Macleod of Cammusdurac.
That was very well pronounced. Then we have Baroness Antrobus, who's also been nominated by Labour.
Then we've got Lord Uday Nagaraju, another Labour peer.
And Lord Redwood, Conservative. Well-known right-wing politician, not like some of the faux right-wingers we've seen go across the reform recently.
John Mowbray is definitely a real right-winger, that's for sure. And Lord Dixon, Mike Dixon of Jericho, and I presume that's Jericho, Oxford, not Jericho in the Holy Land.
I think you're absolutely right there, Sam. We're talking Oxford.
He's Lib Dem.
Well, Sam, that was a bit of a list, and no doubt we'll both be looking very carefully at Hansard in the next few months to see the contributions that are being made by our new peers.
Absolutely. Right, so before we wrap up for this week, Marcus, we both had a stab at the pat of butter, the cost of it. What's the answer?
Drum roll, Sam. Let's have a quick look. Right, Anchor butter, shrinkflation, 200 grams. That is bad news. But the full price is £2.60. I don't think you were far off there, were you, Sam?
Not far off.
On offer, it's between 170 and 185. So, yeah.
But for 200 grams, not 250.
Always read the label.
And because our podcast follows so closely what's actually happening in the schedule of Parliament, this means that our listeners should note that from Thursday the 12th, Parliament is scheduled to take a brief recess. So MPs and peers will get a long weekend, and probably those looking after their kids on half term.
But we will be back on Friday the 13th with a special look at the stages of a bill and how it goes through Parliament.
Now, this is really important. We're going to be grilling Marcus on just explaining both how a bill comes to be put together in the first place. Perhaps it will be a private member's bill or a government-initiated piece of legislation. The stages it goes through, it's laid, what debates and discussions go on to go what's on the face of the bill, and then the various stages all the way through Parliament, through both houses, and then back to the Commons until it reaches royal assent.
Yeah, and then it's back to business as normal for our episode on Friday the 20th, when we'll preview the next action-packed week when Parliament returns on the 23rd.
So thanks for listening to Next Week in Westminster. We really hope this helps you feel more in the loop about what's going on in the heart of your democracy.
And if you found this useful, please subscribe and tell others. We'll be bringing you authoritative and hopefully enjoyable breakdowns of Parliament weekly happenings.
And if you want to get in touch, either find us on X, where you can send us a message at unwi_Westminster, or email directly into us at info@nextweekinwestminster.com.
So it's goodbye from me, and enjoy the recess.
And goodbye from me. Enjoy your recess. Our producer this week was Alistair Elphick, and our researchers are Ben Riley-Smith and Grace Olander. Technical parliamentary research by the College Green Group in support.
Our executive producers are Thomas Bowick and Jonathan Coates. This was a College Green Group production with Indio Media.